Is there a point where the challenge of a really high key it just falls in on itself because the damage output of the run is too high? It becomes a slog? This is actually interesting because there was a discussion on my YouTube comments that I thought was very interesting. In fact, I'm going to show you because no one's inviting me to a key anyway. So there's a video that I made a short where I got one shot by 2 mobs charging me, basically. Ow. Dude, what? Dude, I want to see that death log. Frenzied regen, renewal, healing pot. And I still got 127k overkill. And then this discussion started where someone's like, okay, fair, the damage is getting wild, but either top-end players want infinite scaling or a plus cap. Asking for infinite scaling and expecting the damage to be sustainable feels like an unreasonable expectation. Also, I always enjoy seeing your shock death reactions. And then they're like such a weird point to make. You can have infinite scaling while allowing players to counteract mechanics, not to mention this season progression is gated behind insane monster damage instead of player DPS. And then this person's like, no, you can't. By definition, infinite scaling would eventually reach a point where the damage is so high, everything one-shots you. And then this person was pretty reasonable, but didn't answer anymore, because I guess the other person didn't understand. And then Ireland, this is the initial poster, just one that I made the comment. Again, replying to Jacob here. Jacob being the only reasonable person in this comments section, or the only logical thinking person, yeah. I'm not sure why monster damage scaling makes this a weird point. Are you suggesting that at some point, damage stops scaling and that only the monster health should scale? I can absolutely agree that could be a viable alternative path forward. However, at that point, we are asking them to modify different aspects of the dungeon difficulty, and the dungeon itself is not scaling as a whole as this is done in the present and plus model. From a coding perspective, that makes the design more complex and harder to manage for an audience. Running plus 27 and up that represents an absurdly low number of players. Again, I think you make a fair point. I just believe we have to make sure we understand what we as players are asking of the development team and understand their bosses will measure if the ask is worth the investment of time. So this person is basically saying that the only way to achieve mobs not one-shotting you on infinite scaling dungeons is by coding the dungeons in a way that the damage stops scaling at some point and the HP doesn't. And then they say that that's too much developer work because there's not enough people doing high keys, apparently. This person says the problem is not the damage itself, it's unavoidable damage by not being able to counteract one-shots out of nowhere. Infinite scaling damage that you can avoid by being a good player is totally fine, but that's not the case this season. I absolutely hear what you're saying. My point is that asking them to pick and choose what scales and what does, and how to match across every dungeon is not an insignificant request. Not to mention, level of unplus, this really becomes a mechanic issue and not player skill at the top 1%. Oh my god, that's... I didn't even read this yet. Players asked for infinite scaling, which is funny. This person keeps saying that we asked for infinite scaling, but we did not. Blizzard just came up with it, right? I don't think the community ever gathered and said, hey guys, we want infinite and plus scaling. Like, that was just the idea of M+, right? So to say that we asked for infinite scaling is incorrect, right? Like, that's just how M+ was implemented. But whatever, it doesn't really matter. And we got it, but now we are unhappy that our gear and CDs in a given season cannot mitigate it all. I guess I'm just saying we should be at least somewhat reasonable with our ask as players, especially when we are talking about cutting-edge play, such as M+ 27 to 31. And I say that because when we get down to even what the average high-end player does difficulty-wise at the M+ 20 to 25 level, we see these same concerns be able to be mitigated with our abilities so long as we have to skill and do not make mistakes. Again, I think this is a great discussion, and I think we should voice our thoughts to the developers, but must be specific on what our ask is and see if they might take that task on. This implies isn't by the numbers is a resounding success. Is it? I'd love to see future one at least meet it and perhaps improve with viable solutions. Why is this person saying number-wise the season is a success? Which numbers are we talking about? I'm also certain from an infinite scaling PvE, things eventually just break. Okay. So I just wanted to talk about this real quick because I thought it was an interesting discussion. And the cool thing about this discussion here that it's not like super aggressive. These people are talking to each other normally, right? First of all, big thumbs up for being able to argue about a subject in a reasonable manner without getting emotional. Good job. Now, one thing that I thought was interesting though is that Arland here assumes that they went through all solutions to the problem and that there's no other solution than what they thought of. Which, to be fair, is a problem people have usually, myself included. But the thing Ireland is not thinking about is the fact that we literally have proof of this in the past. We had M+ dungeons in the past that became undoable, not because things one-shot you, but because you don't have enough damage to kill the mobs, right? Because there's two different things that scale in an M+ dungeon. It's the damage output that scales, and it's the HP of the mobs that scales, right? There's not just one variable, there's two, right? And Ireland says that it's inevitable that things one-shot you eventually, which is correct. But he's also saying, or they're saying, that that would be the only thing that holds you back, unless it stops scaling eventually, which is wrong, right? Because there's another thing that can stop you from completing the dungeon, and it's not having enough damage because the mobs have too much health, right? And the perfect scaling of the dungeons would be a combination of those two in a balanced way, right? The best way scaling should work in M+, in my opinion at least, is that things do eventually one-shot you, of course, but it should be able to be survived as long as you're stacking survivability as much as you can. And then the thing that should hold you back, in my opinion, is not having enough damage. Because, in my opinion, not having enough damage to do the dungeon in time is a lot more interesting of a like challenge than not being able to do the dungeon because things just one-shot you. Right? Good morning, Devlin. What's up? Yeah, I agree. Because M+ is about a timer. We have a timer that we're trying to beat, right? And if the timer is irrelevant because we are wiping to a boss that kills us and we cannot survive it, then the things we can do to prevent that as a players is very limited. Because if survivability is the thing that is holding us back, because the scaling of the damage output of the mobs is too high eventually, then that is not a very fun way of being held back as a player base, right? As a high-end player base. The thing that is a lot more interesting is the mob's HP holding you back, right? Because World of Warcraft is all about maximizing the damage output and maximizing your synergy between the group, right? This is literally how raiding works as well, right? When you're trying to kill a mythic boss, like let's try you're trying to kill Mythic Firak, you know that you can survive the boss, right? You know it's doable. It's very hard to survive, but you can do it. So what's holding you back is usually, I mean, not playing the mechanics correctly, obviously, but then also not putting enough damage out, not having enough damage output, not having enough coordination between the players to really kill the things in time, right? And I think in M+, I mean, this is my opinion, right? I'm sure people can have different opinions, obviously, but in my opinion, the thing that should hold you back is the health scaling. Because there's so many things you can optimize as a group to get more damage or to be more efficient in general. And that is what's interesting about M+, right? It's interesting to figure out, okay, which comp are we running? Which talents are we running? When are we using our cooldowns? How are we pulling? Which mobs are we pulling? And so on. Like, that's the interesting part of M+, right? And there's so much optimization you can do to be a bit faster, to make up some time. It's incredible, right? Like, there's a million different things you can optimize to be more efficient, to be faster, right? But the amount of things you can do, if the damage output of the mobs is too high, is a lot more limited, right? The only thing you can really do if things start one-shotting you out of nowhere is, I don't know, like change your setup to be tankier, like bring tankier classes, bring more supporty classes that bring survivability, like evokers. Change your flask to be a more defensive flask, change your gear to have more stamina, stuff like that, right? use your defensive cooldowns differently. Like, you do have tools, of course, to optimize with, but it's a lot less tools than you have to optimize your efficiency and your time that you need to clear the dungeon, right? And therefore, I'm saying that it's a lot more interesting. And whenever they are figuring out the scaling of the dungeon, they should just consider that more. Because, again, Ireland here is saying that the only way to achieve that is by making the damage output stop scaling eventually. And I don't think that's true. They did this in the past where the damage output of the mobs just scales like percentage based with some abilities. So if an ability puts you to really low health, it doesn't all of a sudden quadra one-shot you on a hierarchy, you know. I would like the concept more. If you don't have enough damage, then not survive certain mechanics because I don't play the right class for it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Additionally, it doesn't have to be like super one-sided, right? Like, I'm not saying that the only thing that should hold you back is the health of the mobs, and that the damage output that the mobs do should be irrelevant. Like, I am not saying that, of course. Like, I do think that coordinating survivability and damage output scaling higher and higher is, of course, also important, because I do think it's fun and interesting to optimize your survivability as a group. Like, I think it's interesting for sure. So it should not be like super one-sided in one side or the other. I think it should be balanced, right? For sure. So in a hierarchy, you need to do a lot of damage, but you also need to like survive stuff, right? But I'm saying that if the one factor that should end up holding you back on the highest key levels should, in my opinion, be the damage output and not the damage income. Because that's just more interesting to me. Now, to achieve that, I'm sure it's not that easy, right? Like, I'm sure it's not the easiest thing in the world to balance the scaling this way. But I do think they could probably do a little bit of a better job sometimes to move more towards the timer being relevant rather than the survivability.